Okay, here we go with Chapter 5, the cardiovascular system. Now, what we're going to look at with this system is relatively basic in terms of how much detail we could go into for the cardiovascular system. There are cardiovascular surgeons who will spend years, a decade, learning the intricacy of the cardiovascular system. So we are really going to look at it at a very broad view. So that's going to include the purpose and parts of the system, the heart itself and the EKGs, blood pressure, and diseases of the system. And here we have maybe a slightly gruesome picture of an actual heart surgery being performed. So, how many people do you know who have had heart problems or currently have heart problems? Unfortunately, it could be quite a few or several, but also it could be that you aren't aware of someone who actually does have heart problems because there often isn't any warning signs that there's a problem. So if we just look at an overview of the cardiovascular system, it can be relatively basic in content or to an extent. The heart is going to be composed of, or the cardiovascular system, composed of the heart and the blood vessels. So there, in that description, it's very basic. However, if you remember back from Chapter 3, when we were talking about cells, you had a plasma membrane, where material is going to move in and out of the cell through that plasma membrane, and that facilitates exchange. And so what we do know about the blood vessels is that they are permeable. They are muscular tubes that are going to carry material through the body, bringing nutrients to cells, and then pulling waste from those cells as well. Now, in terms of carrying material to and from the cells, we know that blood is going to be refreshed in the lungs, kidneys, and the intestinal tract and the liver. All right, so when we're talking about being refreshed, this can be with pulling CO2 out of the blood and adding oxygen, which would occur in the lungs. With the kidneys and the liver, toxins are going to be pulled out. In the kidney, toxins are pulled out, extra salt, extra water, and those are going to be the base of your urine that is produced and stored in the bladder. The liver is going to be more important in pulling out garbage, allowing for the breakdown of old red blood cells. And when you think about the role of the liver in your body, also think about the role of it in animals. So if you are a fan of, say, liver and onions, not my cup of tea. All right, liver can be, eating cow liver can be healthy in some situations. So people who are extremely anemic may be advised from their physician to actually eat liver because it's going to be a very high, or has a high level of iron, which if you're anemic, you need extra iron. All right, but on the flip side, if there isn't a medical need to eat that tissue, that meat, then you probably want to do it on a limited amount or very few times over the course of a year, because not only are you ingesting that healthy iron, but you're also ingesting the toxins that were being pulled out of that cow system. All right, the lymphatic vessels, not necessarily part of the cardiovascular system, but rather the lymphatic system. But those are going to be very closely related to the cardiovascular system because those are going to help collect excess fluid throughout the body and return it back to the blood vessels, back into the circulatory system. So What are the two cardiovascular pathways in the body? All right, it's important to understand that there are two pathways. One is going to be the pulmonary circuit. All right, the pulmonary circuit reoxygenates blood and gets rid of the CO2. And that's going to be moving from the right side of the heart into the left. And then you have the systemic circuit, brings blood to the entire body to deliver nutrients and collects wastes, left and to right. So if you think about it, the pulmonary circuit moves blood through the lungs, and then the systemic circuit takes it throughout the entire system, throughout the entire body. All right, in this picture, let me find the cursor, you have arteries taking the blood away from the heart, and then you have veins bringing the blood back to the heart. You'll notice the blood is red on this side. That is because the blood here is going to be oxygenated, coming out of the lungs, moving into the heart, and it's going to take oxygen throughout the body. All right, now you're in the body down here, and all of a sudden the blood changes to blue, or this picture changes to blue. And that's because as the blood moves throughout the body, the oxygen is going to be pulled out for those tissues, whether it's the legs, whether it's the arms, kidneys, liver, digestive tract, whatever. And now it's blue because the blood has gotten rid of most of its oxygen. It's taken on CO2. That blood moves to the right side of the heart back into the lungs where you have oxygen going in, CO2 going out. Over here, oxygen going in, CO2 going out. So that is the basic description of the two cardiovascular pathways. Oh, there we go. Now, looking at the blood vessels. This is not a very good picture, but if you go to your textbook, you can get a better idea, a clearer version of this picture. But what the point is to show the pathway of the blood vessels in terms of the blood starts at the heart, it moves through the arteries, moves into the arterioles and into the capillaries. And you can see that in this picture here, you start off with the artery, the arteriole, and then down into the capillaries. Big muscle here, muscular vessels here, getting smaller. The capillaries, very, very thin, very small. The capillaries are going to be within the tissue, and you're going to have a high amount of oxygen and CO2 exchange here. Very permeable vessel walls here. And then on the flip side, moving blood back to the heart, it enters the capillaries. All right, deoxygenated blood moves into the capillaries, into the venules, into the veins, and then back to the heart. The veins have valves. There you can see it here. And so that's going to help push blood back into the heart. All right, when you think about it, how does blood get from your toes, fight gravity all the way up your legs, through your trunk, and back into the heart? It's because there is muscular material around the veins, but there's also valves, so that the blood moves through one valve. It gets stopped because there is some relaxation of this muscular tissue, but it doesn't fall back to your toes. It just falls back against this valve. More muscle contraction, it moves to the next valve. And so you have continual movement of the blood throughout the cardiovascular system. I had a better picture of the capillaries here, a little more clear. Capillaries have a very different structure. It forms the bed of vessels where the actual exchange of oxygen, nutrients, wastes occurs with body cells. There's only one very thin layer of cells between the blood itself and the tissue. So it's a very efficient transfer. And what this means is there's a huge surface area. And if you remember from, I don't know, chapter 1, maybe chapter 3, talking about how cells are supposed to be very small, so then there's a high surface area to actual interior volume. Right? That huge surface area is important to allow very quick exchange. All right, then there's the lacteals. Those are going to be capillaries that are going to allow for further exchange. All right, now exchange at the capillary, the actual exchange of the blood. You see here, very great figure, or a great figure to look at. Shows the connection between the oxygen-rich blood that flows through the arterial at this part, into the capillary, back to the venule, and you have all of this exchange where you have water going out, oxygen going out, amino acids, these are the nutrients, glucose. And it's going out both ways, water goes out, all right, and then what's going in? Waste material. Water is going back in, all right, from the tissue. And you have pressure, all right? Blood pressure is going to be on the interior of that capillary. So it's going to help move material out. And you have what's called osmotic pressure. And that's going to act to pull material back in, you know, with these green arrows. So it's actually a very efficient, an equilibrated system. It should be very equal. But now if you see how you have, if you were to have high blood pressure, how now maybe you can get a disruption of that equilibrium. The blood pressure and the osmotic pressure may not be the same if you have uncontrolled or even somewhat controlled high blood pressure. All right, here's the picture of the anatomy of the heart. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because, as I mentioned in your notes, what I want you to know is that there's 4 chambers. A left and a right atrium, a left and a right venule, not venule, ventricle, that's the word I'm looking for. All right, but it's very complex, as you can see with all of these different components. All right, so what you do need to know, it's a large muscular organ. It's surrounded by pericardial sac that helps to basically lubricate the heart so it's able to pump well. The blood is separated into 2 sides, the left and the right. There's 2 atria, those are going to receive the heart, or that receive the blood, and the 2 ventricles. Those are going to help pump blood throughout the new areas, whether it's pumping it into the lungs or pumping it out into the body. All right, so when you see an EKG, this is what it looks like. You have a lab that is going to go over this, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. And actually, there won't be any questions on your exam about the particular different types of waves here, because it's very complicated and it's difficult to grasp the concept if you're not going to use it. And you as a citizen are not going to use this material, but it's important to be aware of it. All right, so then what happens in a heart attack? The EKG or ECG looks different, right? Because there's injury. And so this is what a normal heartbeat should look like when you're looking at an EKG. But when you have a heart attack, that can be identified by looking at the actual heartbeat. All right, so there's changes in the time, and there's changes in the pattern of the polarization or the pattern of these peaks that you see. And then we're going to stop here and continue on with part 2, starting with hypertension.